dun, 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 dun.
Was there a specific song you were going for that I didn't know?
It's if you watch the Venture Brothers, you'd get that joke, but you probably don't
I
watch it.
used to watch the Venture Brothers. It's been some time.
It was one of the very early episodes where they're introducing the henchman, and he's like getting dressed in his room, and he's humming the like, and he just like starts like screaming it like as they're getting ready to go, and they're getting into his blue stanza.
I think our next Vivisection we should open with the fourth movement of the New World Symphony, which is basically just Jaws and Pirates of the Caribbean, both lifted from one song.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 ba, 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 ba. Yeah, it's just John. It's the source of all of John Williams' good ideas.
So on that note, welcome to the MMA Vivisection, everybody. This is Zane Simon. I'm joined by Connor Rebish, as always. We are here to talk fights, face punching, fight picks, betting odds, all that good stuff for UFC Brisbane, Mark Hunt versus Frank Mir. And one of the weirdest fucking fight cards that the UFC has put together in a long time. I'm just going to go right ahead and say that this card, I remember looking at it like a couple months ago, or like a month ago when it was announced, maybe a month and a half, and just being like, what the fuck is this card?
Yeah.
Like this is the dart at a dartboard of UFC matchmaking. This is the most random I've ever seen Joe Silva get.
Yeah, and it honestly though, in terms of because when I looked at it a few weeks ago, the initial reaction, because there is almost no name value to speak of, is that this is not a good card. And it's one of those ones where you look at it closely and you're like, oh, this is pretty good. The real card that actually deserves that is the next one, UFC Zagreb, which is going to be rough. It's,
well,
it's got
Zagreb. I'm actually really excited about the Zagreb card because I love new talent, and that card is almost entirely new talent. But that almost always means a terrible card.
Yeah, but look at what the UFC does with the new talent. They match Damir Hadzovic against Mirbek Taisumov. Why?
I know.
Why would you put a prospect in there against Taisumov? Or why would you even put... I mean, I guess Tybura is tested enough, but Timothy Johnson's not like an easy UFC introduction.
No, and Francis Ngannou versus Curtis Blades makes me sad because those are like as legit as UFC heavyweight prospects get. And
they're like, finally, we have two prospects who might turn into something. Smash them together like army men. Come on.
And classically, the Joe Silva's and Sean Shelby's least interesting, or their least successful fight bookings tend to be with new fighters. The better they know their talent, the better they match them. Of course,
yeah. They don't seem to, they prefer the method of, I don't want to develop talent, develop yourself. Go in there and prove that you can take the worst I'm willing to give you, and then I know you belong. Rather than like, oh, you might need a gentle touch, and then you'll turn into something valuable. It's But anyway, we're not talking about UFC Zagreb just yet.
No, we're not talking about Zagreb. We're talking about this card. And when I say this card is fucking strange, I do not mean it's bad. No. It is a fun card. It is just, it doesn't have the look or feel of a UFC card not in terms of like quality. 'Cause that's reasonable to say that. But just in terms of the fights getting booked, I'm just kind of like, what is this? Who puts Dan Kelly against Antonio Carlos Jr. or Jake Matthews against Johnny Case?
The UFC continuing its proud tradition of disappointing local fans.
Yeah, and it's just like, or even like Dan Hooker, Mark Eddiva. Like some of these fights are just, I don't know, they're just weird fights. Yeah, and so it's a weird card, and we're going to talk about it in all its weirdness all the way through.
What's the over-under line for how many Australian fighters actually win on this card? Because I think I'll take the under.
Let's see.
Sadly, for the Australian fans, the UFC does not like hometown fans to show up.
Can we just bunch honorary Australians in with that?
Mark Hunt, I think he considers himself an Australian.
Yeah, Mark Hunt considers himself Australian. Hector Lombard is You know, he lived
Australian
there for a
descent.
long time.
Yeah.
So if we take Hunt and Lombard, I would say reasonably the over-under would have to be.
You got O'Reilly, you got Rawlings.
It would have to be 6. Would be the over-under, and I would absolutely take. I would say probably better set at 4, and I would take the under.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, there are more than 6 on this card, but beyond 6, many of them have 0 chance of winning and should not be legitimately picked.
Yeah.
So I would set the over-under at 4, and then I might still take the under.
Somebody, I play small bets now, so somebody out there who runs a sports book, open that line, and I will take it.
Yeah, it's a good prop bet for this card. All right, so kicking things off in a almost certain to disappoint prelim opener, and I don't mean that as in like certain to disappoint from a fun standpoint, but a certain to disappoint from the local fan standpoint. Alan Patrick versus newcomer Damien Brown. Connor, talk me through this.
Damien Brown is a teammate of Anton Zafir. Is that the guy's name who debuted?
No, it's Ben Wen and formerly Kyle Noakes' camp, unless Zafir has switched camps recently, or unless you saw something with training video.
Zafir may not be the name I wanted to think of. I'm actually thinking of, I know this is a great way to start the card, Integrated MMA, and I'm pretty sure.
It's Ben Wen and Kyle Noakes used to train there, and there's one other guy. I just wrote up this.
Okay, I must have been thinking about something else then. Well, it's just much like Anton Zafir. He is the Australian guy who steps in on short notice against a very difficult opponent. James Mutasser was the guy who Zafir fought, right?
Yeah.
And now we've got Damien. I mean, Damien Brown, you know, he reminds me of Mehdi Baghdad with his striking style. He's got a very kind of, like a lot of Australian fighters, because there's a lot of good Muay Thai in Australia, he's got a very Muay Thai approach to his striking game. He stalks forward, he takes his time, and he throws hard single shots. He can get a little crazy aggressive when he needs to, a little over aggressive, and especially in scrambles and things like that. I think much like a fellow Aussie, Bec Rawlings, he tends to jump on things anytime he sees an opening. Like in a ground scramble, he fought Paul Redmond, and he saw an opening, and he just goes for it, even when it doesn't really suit him to be doing that against a guy like Paul Redmond, whose only reasonable chance to win that fight was on the ground, and Brown just gave it to him. You know, and that's I think a problem that he probably still has, even though he's on a nice streak right now. I just think his style of striking is going to be fairly easy for Alan Patrick to deal with, especially with full preparation. Now, if Brown comes out crazy aggressive, he has a chance against Patrick. But because he hasn't had a full camp, I think that also, it's a gambit, right? It would increase Patrick's chances of taking over as the fight wore on. Patrick is not a pretty striker in all ways, a lot of big, obvious kind of movements, but he knows how to put his techniques together. He moves well. He has a good sense of who he is as a fighter. So, yeah, I take Alan Patrick, and for some reason, I feel like it'll be a knockdown and a late submission after Brown gets tired.
It could be. The thing with Patrick is that he's very willing to grind.
Yeah.
He's the kind of guy who, like, he's big and flashy from the outside, and then he'll rush you up against the fence and just kind of push you there for 3 minutes.
He's like
kind of like. Oh, what are you saying?
Were you going to say Leonardo Santos?
Yes, I was actually going to say Leandro Buscape.
Leandro Silva. That's who I'm thinking of. Yeah, he's like a better version of Leandro Silva.
Yeah, it's very similar style, and when he can dictate range, like we saw against even John McDessie, when Alan Patrick is the much longer fighter, when he can stay on the outside, be fleet, keep his jab out there, he can win pretty easily. He can just kind of pot shot and grind his way to a win.
Yeah.
And when he can't dictate range against someone like Mairbek Taisimov, who puts out a high output, is also a long rangey striker, then he gets torn to pieces. And Damien Brown, I haven't seen anything that suggests he's going to have a great command of range. He's a very low output striker on the outside and tends to try and brawl his way inside. And I'll say this, Brown has a little pop on his strikes, and and I don't think he's actually bad anywhere. He's
Mm.
he's another one of those Australian fighters. The UFC likes to sign Australians who can wrestle, which makes some sense. But a lot of their wrestling is sort of like, yeah, he's the only guy who can wrestle in any of the promotions he's fighting in. So
yeah, Zafir was like that too. Like
yep.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Brown is not at all bad, and even in the scrambles with Paul Redmond, for example, he looked pretty good. It just didn't make any sense for him to be fighting that fight.
Well, and he's also he's really kind of slow. I mean, that's the unfortunate thing too, is that when he gets in these scrambles, he ends up being half a beat behind his opponent because he's just slower than them. And with somebody like Alain Patrick, who is fast, who is athletic, who is dynamic, I just don't see, I can see Patrick picking him apart from range, rushing him into the clinch, pressing him there for a while, and then if Brown tries to get crazy, Brown will just end up getting outworked on the ground.
Yeah, I think if he's smart, Patrick will try and maintain the distance as long as possible and then wear Brown down at every opportunity given to him.
Yeah. And the odds on that pretty much reflect that. Patrick is the favorite -241 to -270, or no, -280 even. Damien Brown, the underdog, +217 to +180. And given the short notice nature of this fight, I would even say that those are a little close. I would be pretty surprised if Damien Brown came out of this with a win.
I think he's the kind of fighter with his power and his killer instinct. He's the kind of guy who, on short notice, it might be difficult to deal with. But yeah, I agree. I'm not sure why the lines are that close. I mean,
he went 0-3 in Cage Warriors. Every single time he's taken a step up in competition, he's lost. Even not on short notice, he's never been able to get over that athletic hump.
And Lon Patrick is totally the guy who could be a Cage Warriors champion at some point.
Yeah, pretty much. So that moves us to what is now the the new Fight Pass prelims main event. And there's only 2 fights on the Fight Pass card because Justin Scoggins versus Ben Wen, which was a great fight, one of the another kind of weird fight, but a good solid scrap, got scratched. So there's only 2 fights in the Fight Pass prelims. Ross Pearson, Chad Laprise, supposed to be Ross Pearson versus Abel Trujillo, which was another fight that just was, I think, one of the weirdest fights out there.
Yeah, I like this fight better.
I like this fight better, but it's also weird. It's still a bit weird. It's 2 guys who are coming off, or who have lost to, and I believe are both coming off to losses against Francisco Trinaldo. And somebody the other day on Twitter was talking about it, and they're saying that they thought that Ross Pearson's loss to Trinaldo was actually more damning than Chad Laprise's loss. And I don't know that either of them are more damning. Like, they're both kind of equally bad.
I think Pearson's just kind of reasserted what his strengths and limitations as a fighter are.
Yeah.
People say that probably because Laprise is still seen as a prospect. It was his first big loss, and so it's just hard to say what it really says about him just yet.
Well, and Laprise just kind of like, when a guy gets sparked early in the first round, you're kind of like, oh, well, that happens. When he just gets systematically outworked for an entire fight, you're kind of like, oh, that's...
I would say that, like, the Brian Barberena fight offered more questions about what Laprise can do than the Trinaldo fight.
Exactly. And so to that extent, you have with Laprise and Ross Pearson 2 guys who are not, who Pearson obviously has been around for much longer, but both guys are kind of similarly styled volume boxers who don't, Pearson's found some KO power lately, but otherwise was not necessarily known for a lot of his career as a KO puncher. And Laprise started out as sort of a KO artist and has become more and more of a volume puncher guy. And you kind of have a war of guys who are going to try and win this, I think, on output and boxing largely. And I'm not really sure where to go with this. I, in my heart of hearts, I kind of want to pick Pearson just because Laprise he slows down over time and he is so limited in what he tends to try to do. It's very much like box, press you against the cage, and that's it. But Pearson's pretty limited too, and he just every time I think he's finding some sort of a groove, like that Felder fight, he then has a fight like that Trinaldo fight, like that Dunham fight, where he just totally looks out of a groove entirely. And I don't know if Laprise can pressure him the right ways to make that happen. I don't think Laprise has the physicality that Trinaldo had to just walk through stuff and pressure him. But I don't know. Picking this fight, I feel like I'm going to lean Pearson just because I like Pearson. But
as good a reason as any, right?
yeah, because I think the big thing is that I just don't see Chad Laprise having the physical edge to throw Pearson off of his game and not having the wrestling or grappling chops to take him way out of his element in a way that Evan Dunham had. Like Trinaldo was just basically walking through anything Pearson threw at him and scaring Pearson off of any consistent offense. And I don't see Laprise doing that.
I think the thing with Trinaldo, I haven't realized this until recently, but the more I look back over Pearson's fights, the more I realize that he is limited when he has to come forward. And I think that Trinaldo had success. I think Evan Dunham had success because these guys did not try to pressure Pearson. I think a lot of people feel like they have to push him back. They have to try to scare him off of his boxing game, but that's when his counterpunching becomes really dangerous. All of his best knockouts are with that left hook counter. And when you're in the pocket with Ross Pearson, he's dangerous. Like when you engage him for long periods of time, unless you're Iaquinta, unless you are a superbly good combination puncher, and it's not like Iaquinta didn't take some shots doing that. Likewise, Gray Maynard had some success, but he ended up suffering because he engaged in that kind of fight with Ross Pearson, a sort of an even ground boxer punchers kind of matchup. I think Laprise here, I favor him because he is an all outside long range type of striker when he is kickboxing. He's got great lateral movement. He moves around a lot just outside of reach, throws good long straight punches and long kicks, and doesn't ever really choose to engage for prolonged periods inside. And I think that means he's gonna force Ross Pearson, because the thing with Pearson is that he has been willing to come forward when the opponent backs off. Trinaldo, they kind of had a stalemate in the start of that fight, but I said before that bout, I was like, if Trinaldo just hangs back and doesn't get too aggressive too often and picks his spots, eventually I think Pearson's going to oblige him and try to create the fight himself. And when he did, that's when he started to really get hit with shots and get taken down. So
it's true.
The thing is, Laprise's stamina is a big question mark. He fights at a high volume. He doesn't throw a lot of power, but he moves a lot. He's a little inefficient with it. But I think the fact that both of these guys have agreed to fight at 170, even though both of them even though both of them were scheduled for lightweight fights, Pearson sent Laprise a message on Twitter. He was like, "Hey, how about we do this at 170? No weight cut, just fighting." And Laprise is like, "Sure." So I have to imagine, while that could probably help Pearson a bit, I think it definitely helps Laprise with the biggest problem area of his game, which is his stamina.
Yeah, that's actually.
So I definitely, it's a coin flip fight in a lot of ways, but I think the style matchup and the fact that I don't expect Laprise to suffer with his stamina as much, and I think having gotten that first loss out of the way, we could start to see him kind of break through and develop as a prospect. I think I like Laprise in a hard fought fight, though. I think it'll be close, and I'm really interested to see it play out. Should be a lot of interesting striking exchanges here.
Yeah, you may have talked me out of my Pearson pick, because you're right. My memories of Ross Pearson, of why he gets beat, are changeable. Like, I don't know. He's a really weird fighter, and
he is.
He's a fighter that I feel like like I say, as soon as I feel like I'm starting to get a beat on him, like in that Paul Felder fight, where I believe I don't know if I picked Pearson for that or not. I don't think I did.
I think
I
we
was.
both picked Felder.
We both picked Felder, and I was really surprised by what Pearson was able to do. But you're right. That is a fight where Felder tried to just come forward a lot.
And especially after he got frustrated, he came forward
Yeah.
predictably. You know, he was
Yeah.
really set on the idea of making Pearson pay for all this, what old school British boxing writers would call cute fighting. And he tried to make him pay, and it didn't work out.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, you give Pearson that kind of fight, he looks like one of the best boxers in the sport. He's got the skills. It's just like, I don't think he's aware that he has to force that kind of fight in order to consistently win. And I think Chad Laprise would be totally happy to just engage in a tepid, long range fight where he and Pearson throw like 10 shots around. I think he'd be happy.
It's true. That's true. That does make me. And the fact that it's at 170 actually does make me favor Laprise. I don't.
It's weird, right? Isn't it? It's weird that they just decided to. They were both scheduled for lightweight. They just opted to not do it. I can't fault them. I wouldn't want to cut the weight either.
Yeah, because Laprise has fought at welterweight for a while before he started out there. He's not a big lightweight, but I think that he's probably a lot more comfortable with being at welterweight and with the welterweight division.
Maybe Pearson views it as his chance to, like, against another lightweight, former welterweight, to try out the division. I wonder if he thinks after that Felder fight that he'll have a speed advantage against the bigger guys, because Felder is kind of welterweight sized, you know?
Yeah, and Laprise does have like Laprise, for not being huge, he does have a pretty good reach, I think.
Mm-hmm.
From he's 71, Pearson's
fights very long.
Yeah, and Pearson does not fight long at all. And shit, you might be right. Okay. I'm swayed. I'm swayed away from my Ross Pearson pick.
All right, don't let this be like the Brad Scott pick again from a few weeks ago. Don't blame me when Ross Pearson just knocks.
If Ross Pearson wins this, I am 100% blaming you.
just because I can justify my own picks. You are responsible for your own picks, Zane Simon.
Just FYI, this is all on you. If it goes tits up, it's all on you. All right, that brings us to the welterweight division in the FS1. Well, still with the welterweight division and the FS1 prelims.
Do we have betting odds for that?
Betting odds. Chad Laprise is actually coming in at -114 to -125. Ross Pearson -105 to +105. So
no problem with that.
Yeah, maybe the gambling public is right there with you. It's a weird fight. Like I say, it's a weird fight because Pearson's been around so much longer and has come close, and in fact edged his way into the top 15 on several occasions. And Chad Laprise is not really anywhere near that, frankly.
And Pearson may do it again. I think Pearson has just basically settled into his role as a gatekeeper in this division. So he may float into the top 15 again, because there are guys at the bottom of the top 15 that he could beat.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what makes it a weird fight. Is it like Laprise has really come nowhere close to beating somebody like Pearson.
Right.
And yet could do so and might not meaningfully do so. Like, he could do so and it may not actually mean anything for Laprise down the road.
I think it's all about the style matchup here.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to Richard Walsh, Viscardi Andrade, opening up the Fox Sports 1 prelims. I hemmed and hawed way too much on that last one, so let's move it along for this one a little.
Okay, well, Rich Walsh looked really solid against Steve Kennedy until he didn't. He really started to gas. You could possibly blame it on the fact that Steve Kennedy looks like he is on the verge of being knocked out literally at all times, even when you're not hitting him. And so Richard Walsh kind of went nuts trying to kill him in that first round, knocked him down like 3 times or sent him sprawling into the fence. And then he was battering him with leg kicks. And then he still ended up being taken down in 2 of the 3 rounds and having to grapple. So it was a little worrying, but all in all, he looked pretty solid in a matchup that he definitely should have won.
Yeah.
I think Rich Walsh seems like the more consistent type of fighter for MMA. He's got that high volume Muay Thai, the pressure game, the solid sprawl and brawl. But Viscardi Andrade is just a weird dude to have to fight. He's not consistent, but he's not really bad at anything. He's not a great wrestler. Like, he's one of those Brazilian fighters who lacks the link between his jiu-jitsu and his striking. But he's not bad at the striking, despite how ugly it looks. He mixes up strikes to the head and body. He throws kicks, and he seems to hit pretty hard. He takes a good shot, and he's not actually that easy to hit. He's got a good sense of where he stands in relation to his opponent. On the ground, he's obviously great. He's got a really good top game, just good old school positional jiu-jitsu. I think Andrade deserves to be considered a live dog in this fight, but I do like Richard Walsh to basically eke out a decision just through consistency and volume. And but I think he'll probably survive a few tough spots.
I'm picking Andrade, and
Nice.
I'm doing it because I don't trust Walsh to stick to his guns. I don't like the Steve Kennedy fight. Like, the Steve Kennedy fight was just such a, like, you are mauling this guy in one specific area, and you cannot for the life of you keep the fight there. Like, he just kept getting into these scrambles where he would just get absolutely outworked by Steve Kennedy.
Steve Kennedy has this weird, like, Verdum Jake Shields thing, though, where you're like, I'm destroying this guy. And then, like, he falls into a takedown and you're on your back. You're like, what is happening? How did I get here?
But I just, like, Walsh is really, like, he's only really good at all when he is in the pocket.
Yeah.
Dirty boxing. Usually he has to have a hand on you, have control of you. And so he really has to be the stronger, more powerful guy in a fight, which was why he should have owned Steve Kennedy, because he was absolutely the stronger, more powerful guy than Steve Kennedy. Viscardi Andrade is not smaller or less powerful
He's a
than
tough dude.
Rich Walsh. He's huge. He's athletic. He, like you say, he's not terrible anywhere. And I think he's just, like, you know, I mean, even Kichi Kunamoto took a scorecard off Steve Walsh just by staying relatively away from him and making Walsh plod after him. And I just see too many opportunities for Viscardi Andrade to not get hit or to force Walsh into a sloppy fight where Walsh is at big disadvantages in his ability to grapple and wrestle.
I see this one as being kind of similar to the Vitor Miranda fight that I picked incorrectly last week or a week ago, except that Andrade is not he is the okay Brazilian striker who's actually not smaller than his opponent in this case.
Yeah.
He's got a size advantage, I think.
Yeah, he does. And so the odds on this are dead even. Every single odd across the board is absolutely dead even. Both fighters are minus 106 to minus 115. Probably the first time I've ever seen that. And you know what? That's fine.
Yeah, why not?
It's a weird fucking fight, and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm picking Andrade to win it just because Walsh, like, you have to be Chris Indich to, like, that's the kind of guy that I trust Rich Walsh. I love Rich Walsh. I love watching him fight. I think he's a hell of a lot of fun. But you kind of have to be, like, if you are smaller and weaker than him, then he can eat you up. But if you're not, I really don't trust him. All right. That brings us to Leslie Smith, Rin Nakai. And this is another weird fight. Another really weird fight. I do not think reasonably that I can pick against Leslie Smith in this fight. But Rin Nakai gets a lot of hate because she looks like a much worse fighter than she is. And she fights like a much worse fighter than her record indicates.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Rin Nakai is not very good. I mean, that's clear right there. She's not terrible, but she's not a 16-1 fighter.
No, But she's also good enough to take at least a round off Miesha Tate. Like, that's the thing. Off the current women's bantamweight champion, Rin Nakai, I would have given her a round of that fight.
Sure, but that's also Miesha Tate, like fighting down
I
to the
know.
level of her competition.
I know it's also Miesha Tate. But the thing with Rin Nakai is that she is a complete ball of muscle with an actual competent judo game.
And a bunny tail.
And a bunny tail.
She makes me very uncomfortable.
The rest of her game, her grappling is actually pretty decent, depending on the position. She's terrible off her back, but she's pretty good on top. Her striking is robotic, and her arms are hilariously short. But women's MMA striking is not like, if that's going to be your worst asset, women's bantamweight is the perfect place to be a terrible striker. You know, like it's a division where you can still survive like that. And so I'm picking Leslie Smith because she'll throw all the volume. She'll come at her from all the angles. If Nakai puts her on the ground, Leslie Smith has a great guard game, will grapple like hell, will work constantly, will probably, should take this fight on a volume decision, maybe even a TKO if Nakai just cannot close distance to save her life, and she may not be able to. But Leslie Smith in the UFC has looked worse and worse. And she is wild to a fault as a brawler. And I don't have any certainty that she can't just get planted on her back and just laid on for 5 minutes. So I'm picking Leslie Smith, but I am doing it in the full realization that I think Nakai looks like more people want her to be more of a joke than she is, and she's more of a joke than her record indicates.
I would like for Rin Nakai to win just so that we have more opportunities to bring her up on heavy hands, because the tangible discomfort Pat feels anytime she's mentioned is just great. Like, I just knowing that Pat is picturing some photo in his head in which she's like in some weird sexy costume and she looks like she did not agree to take the picture.
She's trying to eat a banana off, like out of a shoe or something.
Oh, it's so uncomfortable. It's so weird. I'm not as uncertain about Leslie Smith's chances in this fight. Maybe I'm fooling myself to think that Rin Nakai is worse than she is. I think Rin Nakai, she has some good reactive takedowns when she chooses to let them go. And that could be a problem for a come forward fighter like Leslie Smith. But I also think that Nakai has nothing but like that kind of transition fighting. That kind of, I caught you off guard and you're on your back. She doesn't do a lot of damage once you're on the ground. She's got good control. Yep. But Smith is an aggressive bottom player, and she's pretty good at getting back to her feet. She has a really mobile hips and knows how to walk her way back to the wall and escape when she needs to. And Rin Nakai is so uncomfortable as a striker. I went and watched her. There's a fight of hers on Fight Pass, which is which one was it?
Well, it would have to be her Miesha Tate fight. That's the only fight she's had in the UFC.
No, they have some that are non-UFC
Oh,
fights.
that's right. They got the Pancrase library. I forgot.
Yes, they have her Pancrase bouts. So it was her fight with
Danielle
West.
Okay.
And it is like two women standing 10 feet apart and trying to hit each other with their hands. It's like no understanding of range whatsoever. And Nakai is just like, she does this a lot and blocks and circles and moves a lot and doesn't really get a lot done. And Leslie Smith is just kind of a crazy scrapper. I think Smith is going to chew her up in the striking. I think she'll probably get taken down a few times, but I think she's going to do more than enough damage and be good enough at escaping to take the rounds. I kind of think it's crazy that Leslie Smith is as small of a favorite as she is.
I agree. Smith is the reasonable favorite, but I'm just like, I think the point I would make is that Nakai is like the version, that story about the team that put a midget out to play to bat in baseball. Have you heard about this?
No.
Because
of the strike zone being lower?
The strike zone is defined by the gap between your elbows and your knees when you're holding the bat. That's the vertical strike zone.
Yeah.
So a team sent a midget out as a pinch hitter, and he had no strike zone. Like, every pitch was a ball. That was just like, physically, he didn't have one.
So is that Nakai?
Yes. What I'm saying is that, like, there's a lot of comedy there, but she is such a weird freak in that division and for women's MMA because she is literally just like a ball of muscle. Like, it is, just all a massive amount of muscle. And so she's kind of this weird, immovable object that can't really fight very well, but she also can't be moved.
Yeah, she got that Mark Hunt thing going on where she's just tougher to throw around than she should be given her background. Do you think Nakai wears like creepy lingerie under her fight shorts?
I would almost bet on it. If that's a prop bet, I might take that prop bet. My point being, Leslie Smith should win this fight because she's going to throw all the volume. She's going to do she's going to have all the action, all the activity. But I have a sneaking feeling she's going to be amazingly less effective than she should be. She will still win, but just,
the comedy, if you're right, would be worth me being wrong, definitely.
Yeah. The odds on this, Leslie Smith is the favorite, minus 152 to minus 170. Rin Nakai is plus 130 or plus 125 to plus 143.
You do agree, by the way, that Leslie Smith opening as an underdog is madness.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason that Leslie Smith should ever be a underdog in this fight, other than a loss to Kerry Vera in 2009. She's never really lost she's never lost to a bad fighter at all. The only thing with Leslie Smith is that she loses like half her fights. It's just she is more fun than she is good.
It's true, but the names on her record are all credible.
They are.
Jessica Ai, Sarah Kaufman, Barb Honchak, and she's beaten some good fighters like Rocky Pennington and Caitlin Young. Like, she hasn't done that well in the UFC, but all the only people she's fought are Jessamine Duke, who's not very good, and then Jessica Ai and Sarah Kaufman, who are like up there in that top 5 range.
Yeah, maybe. That brings us to featherweight. Dan Hooker, Eddiva. Take it away.
This fight is secretly awesome. It should be a lot of fun. We've got Dan Hooker, who is like the Muay Thai style kickboxer, really clinch heavy, also a solid boxer in short range with his combination punching. And then Eddiva, who is not a bad boxer himself, more single shots, but has that sort of Sanda long range striking style as well with the side kicks and the low kicking game. Dan Hooker looked really, really uncomfortable in his fight with Yair Rodriguez. Pat and I kind of came to the conclusion that he maybe chooses to fight southpaw when he feels like he's going to have to fight at longer range. But I don't think he's very good as a southpaw. I think he's a lot better, even when he absorbs shots, when he's marching forward in orthodox, putting on tons of pressure, eating plenty of punches, but applying a lot of volume. And if he does that here to Eddiva, I think he can win. Especially given that I don't think Eddiva can match the kind of pace that Daniel Hooker likes to set for 3 rounds. Eddiva got tagged a lot in that Kevin Souza fight. He showed some toughness because he took some clean shots from one of the hardest hitters in this division, but he is also dead tired by about midway through the 2nd round, fighting at a pace that wasn't too crazy, only crazy in bursts. And if Dan Hooker has his way, his pace is going to be even crazier than that. It's not a fight that I would easily give to Hooker. I think Eddiva, he has his tools. He can land the low kicks. If he can maintain the distance with the side kick and land short counter rights and then move away and use lateral movement, then he could do pretty well. But he got backed into the fence really easily in most of his recent fights. And I think if Hooker puts him there, then he wins a close but clear unanimous decision.
Yeah. So first of all, did you see that Dan Hooker is rated as like one of the best strikers in the UFC video game coming out?
I don't understand any of the ratings in that game. I've seen a lot
No.
of fighters posting their profile pictures, and I'm like, where? Also, like everyone is like in the 90s. I'm like, what is this? Like, it's very complimentary, I guess, but everyone is not in the 90s, or else the numbers mean nothing.
Yeah, he's an interesting one because it's like he's rated as a better striker than a much better striker for his division because it's rated like it's supposed to be skewed curved by division.
Okay.
But he's rated as a much better striker for his division than Ricardo Lamas, which
I don't think that works out. No. I mean, Lamas is not like, he doesn't have the striking background, but Lamas is very effective striking in MMA.
Yeah, Lamas is, you know, we talk a lot about how Lamas is like this weird sort of catch-all opportunist, but he's a very skilled fighter everywhere that allows him to find those opportunities. He's, you know, he's got a guy who's barely losing to another top 15 fighter and then finds a moment to snap it up. He's not like getting the pants beat off him.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah, I got to pick Hooker here too. The big thing to me is that Hooker's really, like, his best skill is as an inside fighter, especially in the clinch. That is where he's absolutely at his best, is as a clinch fighter, using his Muay Thai, landing knees and elbows. And the point that causes problems for him is that he's not a very strong athlete. He's not that fast. He's not slow, but he's not that fast. He's not that strong. He doesn't have that much power.
He's a pace fighter. You have to start to tire and wilt before he can start to have his way, you know?
Yeah, and like the classic example, that was the Maximo Blanco fight where Hooker was, you know, all the fight, he was trying to close in on Blanco and lock him up and land shots in the clinch. And Blanco would just shove him off. It'd just be like, nope, you can't hold me. You're not powerful enough to do that.
Granted, if that was a 5-round fight, Hooker probably would have won.
Yeah, he easily could have. But that's because it's Maximo Blanco, and Maximo Blanco is Maximo Blanco.
Yeah.
Eddiva, though, is also not the strongest fighter in the UFC. He's a good, flashy range striker with nice technique. And how sad is it that Kevin Souza got cut?
Why? Yeah, why is Eddiva here and Kevin Souza isn't?
I don't know. Kevin Souza is awesome. He's like one of my favorite cult fighters in the UFC.
Yeah, and he did really well against like one of the top prospects in the division. He did really well in that fight with
Chaz Skelly.
Yeah, but you were right about that, by the way. I got to give you your props for picking the OG Darren Elkins.
I told you, man.
I was so smug about it. I'm so ashamed.
You were so certain. I was like, why is he certain of this? I don't understand it. Elkins he's actually good. Like people do not want to give him that credit because he looks like a mess.
But still, Souza was good in that fight, and Souza wrecked Eddiva. I don't.
Anyway, Eddiva, he's a good, flashy range striker. He's got nice technique. He throws a lot of, he mixes up a lot of good punch kick sets and combinations. But his footwork's not great. He does not keep range comfortably or easily because he lets himself get backed into the fence and things like that. And he's also been a very willing wrestler and grappler when he thinks that he can. And, especially like against Livan Makhachev, he just was very able to get like locked up against the cage and put on his back. And Hooker is actually he's not a great wrestler, but he's a very competent grappler. So even if Eddiva is getting touched up, is getting outworked in the clinch by Hooker and thinks, okay, well, let's mix it up a little and go to the ground, I think Hooker's got the advantage there. Hooker's a much cleaner grappler.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just see too many, the only avenue I see for Eddiva is if Hooker just stays at range and can't close the distance and Eddiva doesn't get tired. And that's just too many options. That's too many factors. It's too limited a scope. So I think Hooker is quite rightfully should be the favorite here. And he is minus 180 to minus 230. Eddiva plus 175 to plus 150. And those feel more or less right. I mean, Hooker is not any kind of dominating force in the division, so I don't know that he should be long odds to beat anyone, but he should certainly get the win. And that brings us to Brendan O'Reilly, Alan Jouban, and
Aussie.
oi vey.
Like, Aussie. Ow.
Yeah. I don't know what this fight is. Brendan O'Reilly, like, man, if like he's the classic try-hard fighter, and I feel terrible for saying that. But he's a dude he's not a great athlete, doesn't seem like he has that great a chin. Doesn't seem he doesn't have any particular skills. He's not a great striker, he's not a great wrestler, he's not a great grappler. But he's aggressive and he's willing. He will constantly come after you. He will constantly pursue you. He will constantly make life as tough on you as he possibly can. And he's actually a really small welterweight, too. He's 5'8". He's very thickly muscled, but he's not an overwhelmingly powerful fighter, despite that. And Alan Jouban is, like, he's not a top prospect. He's a good action fighter, a good athlete. He's got the problem of having a style where he's not great at anything, but he's really decent at a lot of things. So he's going to beat a lot of people, but when he gets up against other elite talent, Warley Alves, well, we'll debate that later, but Albert Tumanov, they can beat him because he's just not elite technically. And he's a very good athlete, but he's maybe not an elite athlete. But still, Alan Jouban is a way better athlete than Brendan O'Reilly. He is a much better technical striker, a much better technical grappler, probably about equal in the wrestling, but that's not going to matter. Brendan O'Reilly will happily clinch with him and try to drag him to the ground. And I would pick Alan Jouban to either catch him with the submission or knock him out with something dirty on the feet. And this just seems like one of those fights that, like, it's just going to be a complete beating unless something magical happens for Brendan O'Reilly.
Yeah, Brendan O'Reilly reminds me of Damien Jackson, except instead of the strength and then gas out that Damien Jackson has, Brendan O'Reilly has stamina and endurance. But similar kind of approach. That's the thing, man. Him diving into the clinch against Alan Jouban is just like that's a recipe for disaster. Alan Jouban is stronger, he's faster, and he's pretty damn brutal in the clinch. His elbows and knees are vicious. If Brendan O'Reilly gets convinced to stay at range, he's going to be eating big, hard southpaw kicks to the body and big straight left hands. If he's in close, it's going to be uppercuts, knees, and elbows. And if it's on the ground, like Alan Jouban has a really solid submission game, great sweeps. He's got the weird 10th planet jiu-jitsu, and unlike a lot of guys who try to use the high guard, the rubber guard, and all of those positions, he has demonstrated that he knows how to do it. But unlike early in his career, he's no longer content to play that game unless it's like a quick opportunistic finish. Nowadays, he stands back up and resumes beating you up. So, I think it's kind of a sacrifice of Brendan O'Reilly as the featured prelim in Australia. I just don't understand the point of this matchup. I think Alan Jouban by first round KO.
It'll be fun to watch, though.
Sure, but it's going to be a shit kicking.
Yeah, it is. All right, Jouban is the favorite, minus 465 to minus 520. Brendan O'Reilly plus 400 down to plus 350 or 325. And like I say, I think lightning will have to strike Alan Jouban in that cage for him to lose this fight.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the main card now, and Bec Rawlings versus Seohee Ham. Take it away.
Hamdulillah Silva, she's the best.
Yep.
The weird thing is, in this matchup, Hamdulillah Silva is not the one who fights like Vanderlei Silva. It's Bec Rawlings. Bec Rawlings, who I mentioned before, is just like aggression. Her 2 UFC fights so far been against Lisa Ellis and Heather Joe Clark. Basically the same thing in both of those fights. One opponent who was craftier and tougher and didn't get caught in a submission. But it's Bec Rawlings walks this tightrope with her style where I see her as this fighter who she cannot see an opportunity. She cannot assess the risk of an opportunity. You know what I mean? She can't see.
She'll never pass up a chance to take the fight somewhere new.
Exactly. If she sees, she's like, oh, head and arm throw, she's gonna go for it. If she sees, they have their hands down, she's gonna run in with a 7-punch combination. She just cannot go. She can't see something without going for it full force, and that puts her in a lot of tough scrambles and tough situations. It runs her into a lot of strikes. It gets her taken down a lot. She's just constantly opening herself up. Now that makes her really dangerous, especially for a more kind of textbook fighter like Seohee Ham. And of course, Ham's big disadvantage, which I think might be more pressing in this fight than in others, is that she's very small. She's definitely a natural atom weight. I'm sure she probably not only cuts no weight, but eats whatever she wants during her training camps to fight at straw weight. And Rawlings is a fairly big straw weight and a very physical one. She has a very physical fighting style. So if Rawlings gets us into the clinch, I think we're in for a pretty tough fight. And that's where she tries to go all the time. I do think, however, that Ham is just a lot more technical as a striker. I think she's actually getting better at fighting bigger opponents too. Her kickboxing looked, she was definitely game, but it was a little wonky in that Joanne Calderwood fight. And she fought an equally large strawweight in Courtney Casey and looked a lot more balanced, had a much better sense of her range, a lot more comfortable, a lot more head movement and stuff like that to get to bypass the longer arms of her opponent. And I think Rawlings is going to be running into those counter left hands. I think Ham, she doesn't have the strength, but like the Mark Hunt phenomenon or the Rin Nakai phenomenon, her size makes her weirdly difficult to deal with in the clinch, difficult to get in on her hips and throw her off balance. So I think she's going to navigate those exchanges as best she can, probably have a few difficult situations where she gets thrown or gets hit with some big shots. But in the end, I think she plays an attritive sort of striking game and wears Rawlings down.
Yeah, this is a tough fight. This is a really tough fight to pick because Rawlings, I mean, she's just got, she is not a very good athlete, not very coordinated or, overly strong or fast or anything.
I think she's a fine athlete. I don't think she's very well schooled. I just don't. I think I think someone on Twitter said this to me, but I think she's doing very little with a lot. I think she seems pretty powerful. She seems aggressive. She's got that attitude, but she just doesn't know how to channel these things.
Well, I think that she's got the right mindset to she's got the right aggression and, toughness. I'm just saying that when you compare her to the upper end of the division athletically, I think Seohee Ham is probably just in raw, physical gifts, probably a better athlete.
Maybe.
But she's also tiny. And
yes. Adorably tiny.
Adorably tiny, yes. She is tiny, teeny tiny. And in general, her 115, her higher weight career has never been that stellar. It just wasn't. It was early on, so she's obviously improved and learned and advanced on that over time. But this is tough. I want to pick Seohee Ham because I like her and she's fun. But I just Rawlings, I don't know. This is a tough fight. You know what? I'm going to pick Seohee Ham because I think the big thing I see here is that Rawlings cannot regularly press a physical advantage. And until I am certain that she can do that, then I have to pick the more technical fighter to beat her. Because like you say, with the over pursuit of opportunities and things like that, even when she has the ability to just push somebody into the clinch, and I think it was It was either her. It may have been her Heather Joe Clark fight, where it's just like you are beating the crap out of this woman in the clinch, but you just cannot keep it there, like at all.
No, and she
And
has to. It's like she had to go for the head and arm throw and got her back taken at the end of the first round in that
yeah,
fight. It's just a lot of like poor decisions mid-fight, and I think that
yeah,
Ham is very much a smarter fighter in terms of how she strategizes, how she thinks about which engages she should be involved in.
yeah.
And the other
And
thing
so,
too is like in a fight like that Heather Joe Clark fight, Rawlings has that all-out aggression, but then
mhm,
she has another mode, which is when she kind of gets scared off, and then her striking goes from wild to like mechanical, where
yeah,
suddenly she's waiting outside and she's like, okay, I can't just stand here. I gotta go. And then she throws like 5 shots that are all just same tempo, same amount of power, everything very predictable, and she gets clipped.
yeah. And that I think is the eventual thing. Is that I think Rawlings is going to have some big moments, and perhaps the bigger moments in this fight.
Mm.
Round to round, I could see her, throwing Ham down and beating her up for a minute, or just like mauling her in the center and landing a bunch of hard shots or up against the cage, and then just kind of losing all the rest of the fight. So I'm gonna pick Ham by a very narrow decision, but I expect this to be a dirty, ugly fight in which there's a constant pitched battle between Rawlings' size and her aggression. Like,
Given the reduced rate at which women tend to score knockouts and easy finishes, and the reduced rate at which smaller people tend to score knockouts and finishes, Rawlings' style has been remarkably dependent on getting an early finish. Like
yeah,
through her career, she won one decision in her career against Rachel Sheridan, and nobody knows where Rachel Sheridan is right now, I don't think.
yeah,
And then basically all of her losses have been decisions. One of them, by the way, to Mizuki Inoue, who's not that dissimilar stylistically from Ham.
it's true. Mizuki Inoue is a bit more well-rounded, but not
Also a
not
little more
dissimilar.
willing to strike in the pocket, though.
Yeah, it's true. So I'm gonna pick Rawlings to lose this fight. Just attrition, and I think she'll have the bigger moments, but I don't think she's gonna win.
I love the
Um,
matchup. It's going to be a blast, I think.
it's gonna be a great fight. Like I say, it's a weird fight, but it's a fun fight. Like it'll be fun to watch. It'll be because Rawlings is never gonna be in a boring fight. Like
No, no.
she will never let that happen. The odds: Seohee Ham is favored -121 to -130. Rawlings, the underdog, +108 down to -105. I'm pretty comfortable with that. I do not think it should be. It should be nothing if not close. Like
Sure.
it's a really close, tough fight to pick. And that brings us to a middleweight bout: James Te-Huna versus Steve Bosse. And
This fight.
wait,
Is it me or you?
I think it's me.
Okay.
And James Te-Huna should win this, kind of.
Yeah,
He's got
that should be the whole pick.
he's got way more experience at a much higher level, but he's also like well past the curve when it comes to when guys start falling off.
He's been
And we don't
fighting for like what, 13 years?
Yeah, he's been fighting since 2003.
Yeah.
And he's been fighting continuously. It's not like, oh, I took a fight in 2003, like all the Brazilians out there who took a fight in like 1995 and then started their career in 2011.
Like Andrade, who was like,
Yeah.
like 2 fights per every 3 years.
Yeah, like Viscardi Andrade. No, Te-Huna's been fighting since 2003, and he's probably at the point where he should be in full decline. Like, his peak, for that should have been 2012. And you look, and he beat Aaron Rosa and Joey Beltran and Ryan Jimmo, and then he hasn't won a fight since.
Neither of these guys has won a fight since 2013, but for different reasons.
Yeah. Steve Bosse, on the other hand, is Steve Bosse ever going to be the guy that's good enough to beat a UFC vet? Like, and I say that knowing that I think he already has a win over a UFC vet.
Well, he's beaten Marvin the Beastman Eastman, and he also beat
Houston Alexander.
Houston Alexander, and firmly cementing himself in the noble role of the new Houston Alexander.
Yes. And that's the thing, is that he's a great athlete with a lot of power and like a really legit athlete. Fast, strong, dynamic. Zero MMA game. Zero. Like, he is literally just waiting for that one shot to land, one opportunity to land that one huge power shot that will end the fight. Everything else is non-existent. Like, the rest of his game outside of waiting for that one huge shot, it basically just does not happen. And he will athlete himself through whatever else he needs to defensively, unless it's the head kick from Thiago Santos. And that's it. And the thing is that James Te-Huna might be willing to just give him that one shot, might be willing to just rush in, head on line, both arms, throwing wild hooks, and just get planted. Ugh.
It's kind of a hilarious fight in how difficult it is to pick and how much it seems like it should not be that difficult.
Yeah. So, you know what? I'm gonna pick Steve Bosse.
Bosse. Go for it. Yeah,
I'm picking Steve Bosse because he's actually like, he is in what should functionally still be the prime of his career.
Yeah.
Whatever that may look like, he should be still as tough as he's gonna be, as fast as he's gonna be, as strong as he's gonna be. I realize he's the same age as James Te-Huna, but James Te-Huna just is looking, even when he's getting the kind of fights he should, he is losing them. And I don't, even when he had Nate Marquardt in exactly the kind of fight he should have, or a shop-worn Mauricio Shogun Hua, who was going to brawl with him, punch for punch, he's just losing those kind of fights badly.
Yeah. He fought, basically, James Te-Huna is in the unenviable position of being the only win in the midst of a 4 or 5 fight losing streak for 2 very shop-worn fighters.
Yeah.
Like, both of those wins don't look any better in retrospect. You could maybe say that, yes, Marquardt still has the power and the speed because of the CB Dalloway win, but Marquardt's not the kind of guy that if you are any kind of top middleweight contender, you should be losing to nowadays. Same with Shogun at light heavyweight. And it's not like Shogun was a big light heavyweight. Te-Huna was a big light heavyweight himself, and he's a pretty massive middleweight, so he wasn't at a disadvantage there, about the same size as a guy like Marquardt. Meanwhile, Steve Bosse's loss to Thiago Santos doesn't look so bad now that Santos had a really credible performance against Elias Theodoro. Santos, by the way, not the kind of guy anyone can survive a head kick from.
No.
Very powerful kicker. I think it's a shot that would have knocked anyone out. It doesn't give me as many questions about Bosse's chin as I have about Te-Huna's. Bosse's only been knocked out one other time in his career, and it was to a heavyweight.
Yep.
When Bosse had the build of a bodybuilder and he was fighting way above his ability, and he gassed himself out battering this heavyweight around the ring before getting stopped. He basically got boxcar homered. And it doesn't make any sense. I'm probably like overanalyzing myself into this position. But whatever, I'm picking Steve Bosse. I think James Te-Huna is going to come running in. I think he only has one pace at which he fights. I think he's just as confident in his hands as he's always been, because it's really all he has. Much like Bosse, he's not a great wrestler, or he powers his way through a lot of stuff that isn't boxing. He doesn't have the defense to back up the kind of high volume, come forward style he prefers, or the chin. And Steve Bosse is probably still more durable. He can definitely place a shot, and he has some considerable pop. He's never won by anything but KO. So I think, James Te-Huna. Go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and for all the time Bosse hasn't spent in the ring, in the cage lately, he's still been training at TriStar all that time. So
Has he?
I think, well, that's what he's listed at. I don't know.
Ooh,
Is he not?
then it's I don't know. I just didn't know that. Then it's Steve Bosse all the way. I'm picking Steve Bosse by first round KO. I just don't like what I've seen from Te-Huna in terms of durability. I don't think he can fight the kind of fight that he used to anymore.
Yeah, he's listed as being at TriStar for everybody. So maybe he's
Nice.
not, but if he is, if he has been at TriStar, then at least you can assume that technically he's getting a little better. He may be in the TriStar. What's his name? Alex Garcia curse in the long run, but that might still, Alex Garcia still might be the kind of guy that puts away James Te-Huna right now.
Right. Alex Garcia still got a few decent wins.
Yeah. All right, so we're pretty much on the same page with that, which makes this maybe a betting opportunity because James Te-Huna is favored minus 245 to minus 270. Steve Bosse, the underdog, plus 221 to plus 190, 185. And I will say there's every chance that James Te-Huna just comes out, wails on Steve Bosse for like 45 seconds, and this fight is over.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So I can understand that, but we're talking about minus 245 odds on what is basically a puncher's chance either way.
And I kind of have the feeling that Te-Huna is going to come out and think he has to wrestle Steve Bosse.
I do. I actually get that because Te-Huna, after his last loss, was like, I'm going to go rethink some things while he was healing up from an injury. And it was like talking about redoing his approach. And a lot of times when fighters try to totally redo their approach, they end up with a mess.
Not after 13 years of doing a thing that works, it's
Yeah.
At that point, I think it's just time to consider hanging them up rather than trying to find a new lane. So it doesn't make any sense. And I wouldn't advise anyone to do it, but I put a very small bet on Steve Bosse because why not?
Well, you're looking at long odds on what should be a coin flip puncher's fight.
Yeah, just for fun. And if let's see, what is it? Bosse by KO plus 325. I think if he wins, it's guaranteed a KO. So if you're book offers prop bets, go for it.
Yeah. That brings us to a next middleweight bout, Dan Kelly, Antonio Carlos Jr.
Yet another ritual sacrifice for the wonderful Australian fans. Don't know what the thought process is behind this. Joe Silva was not thinking of Dan Kelly when he made this fight. He certainly wasn't.
Or he was remembering Dan Kelly's fights. That could also be the other half.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dan Kelly's fight with Steve Montgomery was a fucking barn burner. That fight was a lot of fun. And Dan Kelly did a lot.
I secretly kind of like Dan Kelly.
Yeah, me too. He's a fun guy, and I admire so much how good he has become at mixed martial arts at the age of 38 after competing in 4 Olympics for the Australian judo team. The guy's a boss, and he did really well in that Steve Montgomery fight, so much better than I gave him credit for. But Steve Montgomery is a guy who, even going into that fight, we knew what his very exploitable flaws were, and we knew that he could get dragged into a kind of fight that did not suit him. We've seen him in the past struggle to maintain a fight that suits his style unless he can land those big shots. And that's not Antonio Carlos Jr. Antonio Carlos Jr. he's very fast, he's very strong, and he's a huge middleweight. The kind of guy who will definitely be fighting at light heavyweight in a couple of years when he's too old to make the cut. Great jiu-jitsu game, really creative in scrambles, excellent submissions, really coming along as a striker. He's at ATT now. He was at Nova União before. And he's kind of got that Junior Dos Santos long boxing style. He uses his speed and pop to jump in and out with jabs and lead rights. Good kicking game. He's not great. He's the young athletic kind of fighter who is he's reliant on like those quick transitions, those quick changes of pace, reliant on his athleticism. But he's in there against a guy who is not actually that experienced in MMA and is just not physically capable of competing with him. This isn't like Jake Matthews, Johnny Case, where we've got a guy and we're like, oh, he's against someone who's crafty and older and wiser. Dan Kelly is 38 years old, and unless you give him the openings he needs, he has trouble pulling the trigger on them. So I think it's Antonio Carlos Jr. all the way.
Yeah, I mean, Kelly's another guy who, he has that judo background, but he really thrived on the Australian scene coming up because he was the one guy out there who would wrestle. Like,
Yes, he was the one grappler on the scene. Yeah,
he was the one guy hitting double legs and pushing guys up against the fence and going for a single leg and turning it with it and like actually completing it for a takedown.
Actually finishing his takedowns. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the UFC, like, he has gotten way better.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with him is that he's, the surprising thing with him is that he is like he's a secret monolith fighter where like you look at pictures of him or you look at him like, I don't know, from a distance and you're like, okay, whatever. He looks like some old dude. He looks like a softball coach.
Yeah.
And then you actually see him in the fight and he's just kind of this big concrete pillar. Like
he looks like Stonehenge. He looks like just some structure.
He's incredibly immovable.
Yeah.
And he generates a bit of power with his punches too, actually.
Oh yeah.
But unfortunately for him, because he's learning all the technical aspects of the game so late, he doesn't have the regularity of accuracy and output to actually knock people out.
Yeah.
Sort of like he can really shock you with a short, sharp hook, and then it's kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to start flailing 5 more shots at you as I chase you around the ring slowly because I don't know how to actually follow up that one really nice hook I threw.
I do think, by the way, as an aside, that judoka are sometimes a little better able to learn the striking game than wrestlers because judo allows for the kind of footwork and distance control you would need, whereas wrestlers are penalized for doing those kinds of things.
I think actually judo and Greco-Roman both have a lot of that aspect to them, where you see Greco-Roman guys who have gone into MMA and transitioned, and you can see a lot of them have really sharp boxing. Like it's just like it lends itself to a very stable upper body style that allows them to have both incredibly good takedown defense and understand like good hand positioning and like how to work, and that's kind of where you get Dan Henderson. It's like impossible.
And you got
to
the Fedor and the Rick Hans, these guys who just seem to kind of get the boxing game.
And so Dan Kelly has some of that, but he's just not as fast as Antonio Carlos Jr. He's not as powerful, and Antonio Carlos Jr. is the kind of dude who wrestles and grapples like he does not give a fuck about you. Like that was his problem against Patrick Cummins. I actually wish he'd stayed at light heavyweight because his problem in that fight was that he just was like, okay, I don't care. I'm going to out wrestle Patrick Cummins. Sure. And it's like, oh shit.
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay. Can you hear me fine?
I can
My
hear
dog's
you.
going nuts.
I can just also hear the peanut gallery.
Just a second.
Oh, you want me to carry the show? Okay. Well, I just want to remind our wonderful viewers of the epic clash of titans between Dan Kelly and Patrick Walsh back at UFC Henderson versus Thatch. Just a blast of a fight, a horrible, sloppy affair that will go down in history as one of the fights that most resembles a couple of drunk guys in an alley just swinging bottles at each other's heads. I'm just reminding the viewers of Patrick Walsh versus Dan Kelly.
I believe that was the first time I ever described a fight as 2 guys tied to a shopping cart being pushed together.
It was like two dry-aged T-bone steaks just being clacked against each other over and over again.
The weird thing was that even like because of the styles of fighters they were, the way they actually would move, it actually looked like their feet didn't move. They just kind of ended up slapped together.
Oh, it was great.
It was great. That aside, what I was going to say is Antonio Carlos Jr., he grapples and wrestles like he just does not give a shit about you. And it's because, I mean, he's a world champion BJJ black belt. Like, he's not like I won a few regional tournaments. The dude is absolutely elite grappler.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, in that Eddie Gordon fight, it's just like, no, I'm just going to throw you to the ground, and then I'm going to jump on you, and then I'm going to just, beat the crap out of you and grapple the crap out of you, and there's nothing you can do about it. you will have to. He's very much the kind of like, not only is he in supreme control, but you have to react to his grappling. He's not going to react to you. He is going to make you react to him, and in doing so, he's going to just absolutely wreck you.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of think actually, because of how the leaps his striking has been taking, that he may knock Dan Kelly out in this fight.
He might knock him out, or he'll knock him down, and then he'll jump on him, and he'll just put him through a world of hurt. So, sorry, local fans. I like you, Dan Kelly. Sorry, Dan Kelly. You're fun, and you're a surprising You're a great addition to the world of extraordinary journeymen, or the League of Extraordinary Journeymen.
Definitely.
But you're not winning this fight. Odds are Antonio Carlos Jr. minus 485 to minus 520, or 550, actually. And Daniel Kelly plus 415 down to plus 360. So that's pretty much
no value there, really, because that's about right.
No. And I wouldn't even pick on like Antonio Carlos Jr. by submission, TKO, or decision particularly, because any of those could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to Jake Matthews, Johnny Case, and another fight where like,
sorry, Australia.
Sorry, Australia, because this is going to be really bad for you.
Joe Silva doesn't like you.
We are picking Bec Rawlings, James Te-Huna, Dan Kelly, and Jake Matthews all in a row to lose.
A few of those are toss-ups, but
a few of those are toss-ups. Bec Rawlings, Seohee Ham is a toss-up. James Te-Huna, Steve Bosse is a toss-up. But Jake Matthews and Johnny Case, it does not feel like a toss-up. Mm-hmm. Jake Matthews got himself. He's a great athlete. He's top 10, top 15 level athlete for the division. He's a very good power grappler and power ground and pound fighter. Mm-hmm. He does not know how to make that work. And figuring that out is going to be an interesting thing for him, because I'm not sure he has the training to figure it out. And Johnny Case, while only 26, has been fighting for almost a decade. Johnny Case is a complete, well-rounded, three-dimensional fighter, and a very solid one everywhere. He's a very good grappler. He's a very good wrestler. He's a very good striker. He's moved to power MMA, but I really feel like he exemplified the really good points of that alliance striking style while he was there. He's not a power finisher. Like, he's not a knockout artist, but he puts great volume on guys. And watching that fight that Matthews had with Akbar Areola, it was like never more apparent just how badly Matthews struggles to implement a complete MMA game when he got dialed up by Areola for a round. And Areola is the very lowest end of guys that can fight in the UFC.
Yeah, well, that's why I thought Areola was actually had a decent chance in that fight for that kind of reason. That fight reminded me, because Matthews is one of these prospects, that fight reminded me of it wasn't the exact same way it played out, but like Cody Pfister, Sage Northcutt.
Yeah.
Where you just put someone in there who is just like tough and game and a little more experienced, and you put him in there against a guy who is all athleticism at this point, and also, like Sage Northcutt, Jake Matthews may be limited because of where he trains. In fact, I think like Sage Northcutt, he trains with his dad at a small gym in Australia. And so
Accelerate Training Center, and it's XLR8.
Nice.
Yeah. The thing here too is just that Matthews, with that Areola fight, you could actually see the switch flip in between rounds where he was really pissed off at himself at the end of the first round. It was just like, what the fuck am I doing out here? I just let myself get dialed up by Akbar Areola. And so in the second round, he just went out and just destroyed him.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh yes, I can just go out there and throw you around and maul you.
Yeah, that fight was the perfect. It was both sides of what it means to be that kind of prospect. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have the poise and the experience and the mindset to deal with everything, but you are so damn good innately at a few things that when you get to your area of the game, like his ground and pound of that fight was savage. It was like old school Tito Ortiz or like prospect John Jones with his elbows and overhands, great control, great setups. He had a really good sense of what to do once he had his hands on Arreola and had him underneath him. But getting there was harder than it should have been.
And against Johnny Case, I don't even think he's gonna have he's not, even when if he gets it where he wants it and turns it on, he's not gonna have that kind of advantage. He doesn't have that kind of physical advantage here. He's still a better athlete than Johnny Case, but Case is just so much more skilled everywhere and athletic enough to compete and to scramble out, to get to his feet, to find range, and to do all the things he needs to do in this fight. So I'm picking against Matthews.
Yeah, and a few people, particularly Australian fans, I think have said like, "Oh, how do you think this is an easy pick for Johnny Case? Jake Matthews this, Jake Matthews that." I think people think I don't respect the talent of Jake Matthews. Jake Matthews has great potential. He could, like you said, top 15, top 10 level athleticism. He's only 21. He's still at that point where he could very well make a massive improvement in understanding from one fight to the next and get a lot better. But he just lacks experience and the kind of technical depth that comes with experience.
Yeah.
And Johnny Case has that. He is a veteran, despite the fact that he is also only 26 years old. He's young himself. And he's just good everywhere. Like, even if Jake Matthews can hit that reactive double and put Johnny Case down, Case is not Akbar Arreola on the bottom. He's not going to contentedly play a very limited closed guard game and try to survive. He's going to scramble. He's going to throw up submissions. Case he had no trouble with Jan Cabral on the ground.
Yeah.
He like that. He didn't even fight the kind of fight I thought he would in that matchup. And he just it was a breeze. He is a good technical fighter in just about every phase. He's got that Frankie Edgar or Dominic Cruz way of blending his boxing with his wrestling. He's probably going to catch Jake Matthews' kicks because he doesn't set him up very well and put him on his back. He's got good punching. He's not a finisher. He doesn't have that ability to put a stamp on a fight, but he's a very, very consistent and very experienced fighter. So I think Johnny Case is just about a lock to win this fight.
Yeah, the big question for me is, honestly, how good does Matthews look in a loss? Like, how much skill growth have we seen? Where can he make this a competitive loss? Can he make it so that he has big moments in every round and that he shows exactly what he's capable of, maybe even wins a round if he can get, if he can get locked down on top control and land a bunch of good shots or push Case against the fence and beat him up a little? Does he have the ability to do that?
I'm not confident that he can. And I just, again, we've complained about this a lot the last few weeks, but what is the point of this matchup right now?
I don't know. This is, like I said, this is dartboard matchmaking.
Akbar Arreola is the kind of fighter you match Jake Matthews against right now. Like someone
he squeaked by him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what he needs. He needs fights where he's like, okay, I can't do this. What do I learn from this? I had a tough fight with a guy who is more experienced, but it's winnable because he has very exploitable holes in his game.
Yep.
And Johnny Case is not that. He's more experienced than Akbar Arreola and a lot more complete.
Johnny Case is he is a gatekeeper action fighter to the elite.
Yeah.
He's the kind of fighter that will float around the top 15 to 20 and be a really fun action filler fighter on cards, and only his lack of stopping power is going to keep him from actually taking the next leap up to being an elite fighter.
Right. Very reliable performances from Johnny Case, though.
Yeah. So on that note, these odds are dead even.
They're insane.
And it makes no sense.
They're insane.
Yeah. Johnny Case is minus 105 to minus 120. Jake Matthews is minus 102 to minus 120. So
some lucky bloke on Twitter got Johnny Case at plus 100.
Oh, Lord. I don't Matthews is going to have to really show like a huge boost in skill to win this fight, because and I realize Johnny Case, it's not like Johnny Case has never lost, but he lost to Rick Glenn, who was a pretty hot World Series of Fighting prospect back in 2010. Johnny Case lost to Rick Glenn. And then, he got TKO'd a couple more times early in his career. And he hasn't lost since 2010.
Yeah. He's on what is this, like a 12-fight winning streak?
Yeah. And he beat Frankie Perez, who is like, a pretty similar prospect to Jake Matthews, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And he beat Jan Cabral, and Jake Matthews, his grappling and his groundwork is his best skill. And for a Case to just go out and beat Jan Cabral, that kind of tells me that is not happening.
Yeah, it's Jake Matthews could, I have to acknowledge that he could make a giant leap from one fight to the next in technical ability. He could suddenly develop into this amazing fighter. He has that kind of John Jones ability, that John Jones athleticism, but this is not light heavyweight. That's the difficulty for a prospect like Jake Matthews, that you need to be matched more carefully if that's what you're relying on, because, Johnny Case is not a top 15 lightweight. And even so, he is better and more well-rounded than a guy like Matt Hamill or Brandon Vera. Yeah. It's just a deep division. You're going to run into.
Frankly, Jake Matthews isn't Warley Alves either. Like, Warley Alves is top 5 athletic potential, top 1 to 5. And that's a dude who is surviving on okay, I know some grappling, and I'm a great athlete. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing him still thrive because he's so ridiculously athletically beyond the norm. Jake Matthews is just a good cut beyond the norm.
I think he's more like John Jones. His athleticism trends a little more in the direction of stamina and less in the crazy explosiveness. He doesn't have massive power, but he seems to pick things up really quickly. And he gets fighting. Yeah. And it's very clear that he does, but he's just he's not in as forgiving a division where he can just run through experienced fighters because, the talent pool is shallow. It's not. True. It's lightweight. It's the deepest division in the UFC. It's a tough place to be for a prospect.
All right, that brings us to Neil Magny versus Hector Lombard, and I forget who led on that. I think this is you.
Maybe.
Does that feel right?
I'll take it.
Yeah, take it.
Yeah, why not? This fight, a lot of people feel really confident that this is Neil Magny's fight to win, and there are reasons for that. Hector Lombard's coming off more than a year suspension. He popped for, let's see if I can pronounce it, desoxymethyl testosterone, a steroid, as you can maybe tell. And now he's under the USADA restrictions. It is very likely that Hector Lombard could be a very different fighter than he was before the PED suspension coming back. But I think this style matchup is a little trickier than it seems at first. Neil Magny, we know that Neil Magny's a guy who doesn't just run through many opponents. He had a fairly close fight with Eric Silva. He had definitely a close fight with Kelvin Gastelum. He had a close fight with it was even kind of close with Hyung-Gyu Lim at certain points when he was getting hurt early in that fight. He seems to he has moments in just about every single fight where he has to get into his groove. And we know what his groove is. His groove has become clinch and fence work, tricky clinch takedowns, and top game jiu-jitsu and ground and pound. That is the thing where Neil Magny does really well. He's not that great of an outfighter. He's not disciplined enough with his boxing and kickboxing to keep an opponent on the outside and to keep his back off the fence. He needs that clinch to win. And Hector Lombard's not a guy that you can easily beat in the clinch. Even if he is reduced physically from what he was, the way that Hector Lombard disrespected the grappling of Jake Shields, I've never seen anybody else do that to Jake Shields. I really haven't. He just threw him around like a baby. He had no fear. And it wasn't just strength. Jake Shields could not outposition Hector Lombard in the clinch. He's got a judo background. He has great balance and great takedown defense. And Yeah, I just don't know how well Neil Magny can do tying up with Hector Lombard. And Lombard covers distance really quickly. He hits really hard. Again, that may be reduced somewhat, but he's still dangerous in that way. I have to imagine. And Neil tends to get hit early. He tends to get backed into the fence. And again, he needs that clinch to save him. So there's some difficult spots here for Neil Magny. I think what he has in his favor is obviously the stamina. Magny is a workhorse. He does not slow down. Lombard absolutely does. Basically, whenever Lombard hasn't been able to put someone away early, he has found himself in a fairly close fight, no matter what level of opposition he's facing. That's been the case for him in the UFC. He's not been the guy he was in Bellator when he was just knocking people's heads off and walking away. And then there is the fact that even though Neil Magny backs himself into the fence and all of that, can be somewhat aware, and I don't think Hector Lombard knows how to cut off the cage. He follows opponents around. He attacks in straight lines. He's going to give Magny more opportunities to escape than other opponents would, and I think that is going to allow Magny to move around and wear Lombard out enough that he can start to work his clinch game later in the fight. I think it's probably a very tough first round, maybe even Lombard taking the first round from Magny, and then Magny gets a unanimous decision. But I'm not as confident in this pick as I would like to be.
I think the big things here are that I think that Lombard is actually just a little too limited at welterweight to make Neil Magny not be an effective range striker. Like, I know that Neil Magny's not consistently an effective range striker, but my dog is licking my foot right now, and that's really distracting. So cut it out. But Magny's not consistent there. We saw even in the Gastelum fight where he was doing really well for most of that fight, and then at the end he kind of got at range, and Gastelum just started lighting him up. But Lombard's arms are so tiny, so tiny.
He's a T-Rex.
He's a little T-Rex. And if I think, remembering that Josh Berkman fight, that was the ugliest fucking fight. Like, Josh Berkman never, I don't know. I don't think Josh Berkman won a round of that fight. He might have on one card. But he was legitimately in every single round. Like, there was never a point in which Lombard was actually controlling that fight. He was just sort of slightly outworking Josh Berkman because Josh Berkman fights like he did in that KJ Noons fight where he won't throw a strike for 4 minutes.
Yep.
And that's not Neil Magny. Like, Neil Magny will come out with volume, with consistency.
Yep.
And even if he gets himself backed up against the cage, Lombard's not good enough at cutting off the cage and has none of the reach. That I think Magny's just going to be able to escape too much, and the reach advantage is going to be so hugely drastic that Lombard is just going to end up stuck outside a lot or forced into predictable wrestling where he might not be, like, he will actually be somewhat less effective because he's going to have to end up trying to, like, jump on out wrestling Magny, which he could do, but I think he'd be much more confident in that of forcing Magny to shoot in on him and then stuffing it and then punching him out in the clinch.
It's just kind of similar to Alex Garcia versus Sean
Spencer.
It wasn't Sean Spencer, was it?
No, not Sean Spencer, but Sean Strickland. There we go.
Yeah. Is it kind of similar to that?
A little, yeah. Where it just, like, Strickland isn't actually an amazing range fighter.
Yeah.
He's not bad.
And it's like the style matchup in a lot of ways shouldn't favor the bigger guy. Like, the boxer puncher often is a tough type of fighter for the pure outfighter to deal with. But it's like the limitations of the small guys in these fights and the work rate of the bigger guys is what wins it for him. Like, I think it's work rate.
I'm not at all sure that Lombard, like what we may have been seeing in that Berkman fight, is like Lombard hitting the wrong side of the aging curve, and especially like minus steroids, that could come at you fast because he's 38 and he's been fighting since 2004. So that aging curve should be taking a bat to Lombard's, face any moment here.
And Neil Magny's definitely on the opposite end of that coin.
Yeah. So I don't think that I don't see Lombard finishing Magny, and then I don't see him outworking him. Basically.
Sure, I agree with that.
And that the odds on that, Neil Magny is a slight favorite, minus 127 to minus 145. Hector Lombard, the underdog, plus 100 to plus 122. I think it's maybe a little close, but Lombard has certainly already achieved higher highs than Magny, so I can understand the reasoning. And that brings us to the main event, Mark Hunt, Frank Mir. And Mark Hunt should dust Frank Mir, but he might not. Like, Mark Hunt looks great. He looks like he's getting in great shape. It looks like he's really putting himself into a whole different training schedule and maybe even to the best shape of his career, like actual physical shape. Well, not best physical, because you can see those early kickboxing careers early kickboxing highlights where he's like cut and you're like, holy shit, that is a absolutely terrifying version of Mark Hunt.
The Mark Hunt who would throw flying knees and shit.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But he's getting closer to being back in that kind of fitness. He doesn't have that kind of explosion anymore, but that kind of fitness. And Frank Mir is kind of slowly drifting away from that kind of fitness.
Yeah.
And Frank Mir, like, he spent a lot of time on his boxing lately, and he said he was very particular, like, I will outbox the shit out of Todd Duffy. And he did, more or less.
He definitely did.
And then and then he immediately did not against Andrei Arlovsky.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I see this fight, is that, like, Hunt is still way technically beyond what Frank Mir is doing as a stand-up striker. And Frank Mir no longer has that kind of spryness to his game. Like, I remember I watched the recent, like, Ian Freeman mini fight documentary that UFC put out. If you did, I don't know if you saw that or not, but it's really pretty cool. And they showed, like, they went back to, like, Ian Freeman's fight with Frank Mir back in, like 2002 or whatever. Frank Mir's been around for fucking ever. And, you remember suddenly there's, like, very lithe, like, hard kicking, spry Frank Mir that's just, like, dancing around and throwing all these really nice, like, body, leg, and head kicks and all this crap. And that guy is just not really happening anymore.
No.
And if it's just going to be like him and Mark Hunt getting in the pocket and trading bolos, I know where my money has to go. And it's all on the Mark Hunt end of this equation.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's so hard to count Frank Mir out. Like, that is the thing. I think Frank Mir thrives on that, like, being counted out. Yeah. It's almost like he went to the Arlovsky fight. Everyone's like, man, that Duffy KO was great. Frank Mir's got a shot. And so he shits the bed, like you give him no.
Hey, it finally happened. Has to happen once every show. Hopefully Connor's back in just a second. We are, as always. Hey, there you are.
Tried to make it quick. You give Frank Mir expectations, and that's when he struggles, Or like the Brock Lesnar fight, you're like, oh, Brock Lesnar's a destroyer. He's going to come in and Frank Mir, like, locks him. Like, that's the kind of thing where Mir thrives. But you put him in a title shot with Junior Dos Santos, and it's like, or you're like, oh, how will his jiu-jitsu thwart the wrestling of Daniel Cormier? And he just gets mauled. And so I think in this fight, It may be because I think the odds are fairly close. I think the general expectation among MMA fans is that Frank Mir is going to lose. So I think Frank Mir will probably come out with a chip on his shoulder. I think he'll probably try to put some hands on Mark Hunt early in the fight. He was saying earlier, he said, Mark Hunt is not as good in my area of the game as I am in his area of the game. So I think he has, and he is true. He's right.
Yeah.
But I think his notion, right. But I think his notion is that I can box with Hunt better than he can grapple with me. Ergo, I will box with Mark Hunt. And I think even if he does that, and he's not a bad boxer, Frank Mir.
No.
But even
not Ryan Bader, but
he's not bad by any means. But I think even if he does that, we have the critical issue of energy management, where Mark Hunt getting into good shape. And Mark Hunt has a maturity to his style now, where he knows Mark Hunt is not the same guy he was when he was young, but he knows that, and his style reflects that. Mark Hunt is now a lower volume, more calculated, more counter-punching based striker. He's been that way in his whole UFC run ever since he kind of revamped himself. And Frank Mir, man, he couldn't have fought another 3 minutes against Todd Duffy at that pace. I think he's just too willing to engage in whatever is the difficult style of fight with his opponent when he has that chip on his shoulder. And it really shocks some people. But I don't think Frank Mir can shock KO Mark Hunt. It just doesn't seem likely. And even if he's competitive for 2 minutes, like Mark Hunt's going to take over after that. It could be like the Roy Nelson fight where it's like, oh, he was tougher than expected, but then ultimately Mark Hunt knocks them out.
The other thing I would say, too, of Frank Mir is that against really good technical fighters, he tends to fight the slowest and most boring fight imaginable and safest fight imaginable.
Yeah.
And so even if he comes out with a chip on his shoulder against, even if he thinks like, okay, I can beat Mark Hunt, I can box with him, he's very likely to fight the slowest paced range stand-up staring contest fight possible. And frankly, like, you can't give Mark Hunt many better fights than that. Like, if you just give him a ton of time to sit and look at you, like, that is absolutely what Mark Hunt wants.
It's a total gambit for Frank Mir because he needs to, like, he has to rely on the very slim chance that he can fight at a breakneck pace early and surprise Mark Hunt and hurt him, or he has to let Mark Hunt stay in the fight. And Mark Hunt has done a good job of being like a late finisher in a lot of his UFC bouts. And I think getting into better shape as he is now, he's only going to become better at that. So it's just hard to see like a clear lane to victory for Frank Mir. That may be exactly what fires Frank Mir up to get a win. I can't count him out 100%, but I definitely am favoring Mark Hunt by KO.
Yeah, the odds on this, Mark Hunt is favored minus 155 to minus 180. Frank Mir, the underdog, plus 120 up to plus 153. I think that's reasonable. It's heavyweight.
It's heavyweight. The odds should never be wider than 200 in either direction.
Exactly. Heavyweight is not a division where you want to see wide odds on fights. And Mark Hunt is a favorite, but it's a division where, if Frank Mir KO'd Mark Hunt, I would be a little surprised, but I wouldn't be like shock of my life surprised. To be like, oh, heavyweight.
I'm prepared for it.
Submitted Josh Barnett.
Yeah, I'm prepared for it. It could happen, and I know it could happen. Be a lot more shocking than Dan Kelly KOing Antonio Carlos Jr. You know what I mean? A lot more shocking.
Yeah. All right. On that note, do you have any other did you want to offer any more betting advice?
I don't think Mark Hunt is a bad bet. As a slight favorite, I think he does have the strong chance of winning this fight. If anything goes the way that it should, Mark Hunt should beat Frank Mir. Frank Mir just doesn't have the wrestling or the cage craft to control Mark Hunt and take him down, which means he has to strike with him. Anybody who has to strike with Mark Hunt has a very tough night in their hands. I think Johnny Case is a goddamn steal at such small favorite odds against Jake Matthews. He is that fight I see as being almost as one-sided as Antonio Carlos Jr. versus Daniel Kelly. And yet the odds are way, way different. Steve Bosse, maybe not bad for a tiny little underdog chance bet. Don't waste your money if you're going for something big, but if you can spare a few bucks, why not? And then I like Ham over Rawlings, though I do think that's a tough fight. I think she should win it. And I definitely like Leslie Smith over Rin Nakai.
All right. On that note, you can find me on Twitter at TheZaneTime. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find both of us over on Bloody Elbow, where we'll be doing all our writing. Give this video a like. That's a thumbs up. That helps us a lot. Subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM over on YouTube. That helps us too. That way you get the latest of all the Bloody Elbow shows, interviews, analysis, all that good stuff. Next week, we will have a run of all of our normal shows, but no UFC-centered content, no UFC show next week. So we'll just have Knuckle Up, If I Did It, Prospectus, all that good stuff. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in this time. We'll see you next time.